When John first contacted me and said that he knew Jesus in a past life, I immediately, rolled my eyes and was like, whatever. But through a really weird series of synchronicities, I decided to give it a shot. We had a nice conversation. And do I believe him? I don't know. But I did really enjoy our conversation. So I'd like to share it with you. I hope you enjoy it too.
Shaman Oaks. Normal people, extraordinary experiences.
Well, I guess if you meet someone for the first time in this, like, how do you describe yourself and your journey?
I usually start with my background. My background being the fact that I was raised as a good Catholic boy with a mother who had a master's degree in liturgy and became head of liturgical doctrine at my church, which basically means when the priest wanted to do a sermon, he had to actually pass it by my mom. That's how Catholic we were. And I did 12 years of CCD, which is, Confraternity for Christian Doctrine, better known as Sunday school. And I had to go through all 12 years of it and do all that stuff because mom was Catholic. But when I turned 18, my mom said to me, John, spirituality is a personal journey. You need to discover what you truly believe. And I hope you'll come back to Catholicism. But you need to go off and figure this out. So I went off, and first thing I did was became an atheist because I didn't want to go to church on Sundays.
Totally, yeah.
And so I was like, I became an atheist, and I found very quickly that a world without faith in something is kind of prone to suffering from what the news tells you, and you end up getting pretty depressed pretty quickly because the idea of there being no hope, no potential for something good, all you're seeing is what's fed to you on the news, and the news is predominantly negative. So I was not going down a good way. So I was at the time I was doing Renaissance festivals. I did a comedy sword fighting show called Hack and Slash all over the country, and I ended up going to a Renaissance festival in Milton, Ontario, in Canada. And I was at a friend's house, and a whole bunch of us were staying there. And she, we're all hanging out in the afternoon and having some good Canadian brews and, having a good time on the back deck. And the whole time I was sitting there, I'm just kind of sitting in the back of the room and I'm watching. And this woman on the other side of the room keeps staring at me. And I'm like, this is really kind of awkward because I know that's her husband right there. Why is she staring at me across this room? And she gets up, she walks across the room. She says, you walked with Jesus, right? And I was like, excuse me? She says, yeah, you walked with Jesus in past life. And I was like, yeah, what? Yeah, okay. Now, being my background in Catholicism basically said I don't believe in psychics because we're not supposed to.
Right.
Psychics and seers. So I was like, oh, okay, lady, great, thanks, right? But the more I thought about it, it just really, oddly enough, just felt right. And I could never figure out why it would just feel right. So I leave there, and I go to Maryland, and I end up camping right next to her and her husband. So I said, hey, I want to talk to you about that thing. So she says, well, let's go have a reading. So I said, I've never had a reading in my life. I said, all right. So we sat down, and in the middle of her first reading, it was the most bizarre thing I've ever experienced. She did a full body channeling, trance channeling. She went full straight up. Her eyes looked like different eyes, different voice. She says, John of old, John of new, I love you. I've always loved you. I will always love you. I'm with you. I've always been with you. I always will be with you. And basically, at that point, then said, do you want to see me? And do you see me? And I said, no. He says, then close your eyes and see, is what she says. So I closed my eyes, and suddenly I have this weird experience of feeling like my head's coming up out of the sand. And I'm like, what the heck's this? And I look up and I see feet, and I look up and I look at somebody standing above me, and I don't really know who it is. And I lose it instantly because this is just too weird for me. So I had that weird experience, and I was like, this is crazy. This is insane. Why I can't deal with this. So I just kind of blew it off, and I just pretended it was just a weird experience, and she was using mind tricks on me or whatever. And I go to the festival that weekend in Maryland, and I'm sitting there talking to a friend of mine who was a professional mime at the festival. Yes, I had friends who were mimes. And all of a sudden, in the middle of our conversation, she says, "You know, you were John the Beloved, right?" And I was like, "This is so bizarre. Why, why are you saying that?" Well, we talked about it for a little bit. I just kind of blew it off again. Ended up visiting my friend was working at that festival. He also did holistic fairs and he sold jewelry. And I went to visit him at this holistic fair. And I'm walking down this aisle right past all these psychics. And this woman stops one of her readings and runs out, grabs my arm. She says, "You know, you're John the Beloved, right?" Well, long story short, it ended up being 19 of them that came up to
Wow.
me. And it was just like one after another after another. And at one point, it was, probably I would say the first 8 or 9 were completely spontaneous. And then about the 10th time, I found out there was a book written called The Messengers about a guy who remembered being the Apostle Paul. And I read the book and I said, well, I'm going to find out if I can get a hold of one of his readers, just out of the blue, without saying a word, just call up and set up an appointment. And I called up to set up an appointment. And normally this woman her name was Atira Hatton. She's one of the Association for Research and Enlightenment Certified Psychics, better known as the Edgar Casey Foundation.
Oh, cool.
And she answered her phone that day instead of the person who usually books for her. And she answers the phone. I say, "Yeah, hi, I'd like to set up an appointment." She said, "Oh my God, you're the one they're looking for. You were John the Beloved." And so it's just like all these things. After all these people told me, I was still just completely skeptical from my own background. And what happened was I said, okay, I don't want a psychic telling me another thing. I want to find somebody who's truly credentialed, somebody who can truly be, can come from a science place. And so I started researching past life regression therapists. And I found this wonderful woman in Virginia, Alexandria, Virginia. And I was in Maryland anyway, so we were right next to each other. So I set up an appointment to go have this regression with her. And I go there the week before, and she guides me through a meditation. Then she sends me home for a week with this meditation so I can get myself acclimated to her voice. And for a week, I meditated with her voice. I go back the following week. I walk in there not having any clue what was about to happen. And I lay down and she takes me through the process of hypnosis. And, in the process, they lift you up and they set you back down. So they lifted me up and they brought me back down and then kind of like let the fog clear away. She says, "Where are you?" And I looked down and I was literally standing on a stony beach. There was stone and sand mix. And it was funny. The first thing I saw was bare legs. And I thought, well, there's no way I'm an apostle because they always wore robes, right? And I'm thinking, this isn't going to happen, right? Well, I found out after doing my research after the regression, what I was wearing was called a fisher's coat. It was what Galilean fishermen wore when they would go out on boats, because if they were wearing robes, they'd be pulled under the water when they fell off. So I'm wearing basically a Galilean one-piece bathing suit. I'm sitting there. I have a whole bunch of nets and ropes in my hand, and what I'm doing is there's tears in it, and I'm tying them back together. And to my right, there was an elderly man there who was obviously had a really bad back. He could barely stand, holding onto a stick, holding himself up. And I knew it was my father, and I knew him as that he was Zebedee. He started to talk to me, and when he's talking to me, I could not understand a word he was saying because he was speaking a different language. And I said in the regression, I said, I can't understand him. And she said, well, put a megaphone to your ear, imagine a megaphone to your ear, and see if you can hear him better. And I don't know what happened with that megaphone in my ear thing, but I suddenly was understanding what he was talking about. There was an issue with the way we were going to transport fish from the beach up to the market. And there was something that would move us from here to there was broken. And so we were trying to figure out how we were going to carry them up there. But then she says, what's the next most important moment? And I said, okay. So I look over and there's people running down the beach to my left. And people are running and I look to my left and there's a crowd. I said, there's a crowd. She says, do you want to see what that is? And I ended up just basically turning and walking. And I get to the crowd and I kind of push my way in. And as I get to the center of the crowd, I can see this one person in the center of the crowd. And the second I see him, it's the most strange experience I've ever had. I could feel his presence. I could feel just the pure essence of love coming off this person. And he looked at me, and he gave me a look like he knew who I was. And he walked over and he raised up his hand and he laid it on my chest. And when he laid it on my chest, I had what I would now consider, in my regression, I had what I consider a near-death experience. I literally left my body, went to the pure place of whiteness and pure love, and one with oneness is everything. And in my original regression, you could hear me moaning for about 7 or 8 minutes. And I edited that out because it sounded a little pornographic when you hear it outside of a regression.
Right.
And then she says, "Are you with him or are you him?" And I said, "I am within him," and which was a strange thing to say. Then she says, and she stay with it as long as you want, and I did. I stayed with, like I said, 7 or 8 minutes. And then she says, what's the next thing we're going to? And what's the next most important moment? What's the next most important moment? And the next most important moment was feeling and experiencing all my fears and my anxieties and my separation from that feeling. And that's the key way of saying it. That feeling is our baseline. It is who we are naturally. And we come to this experience to experience that separation so that we can come to understand that feeling of, for lack of a better word, unconditional love more fully, because we could never know it without knowing the baseline of feeling its lack. So I'm sitting there and I'm feeling this lack, and I'm feeling all the weight back on my body, and I'm watching him, Jeshua ben Joseph, the guy better known as Jesus. I'm watching him walk away, and I'm like, I have to be with him. I have to be with him. And I said, he gave me a glimpse of everything, and now I have to go with him, which really explains why apostles would literally just get up and walk away from their life, because they suddenly get an experience of what our true divinity is. And the only way they got it was through this person who just walked up to them. And so you have to go with them because nothing else really matters at that point. She says, now this is where my regressionist did make a mistake. Now, her classic way of running a regression is to take the person to the passing of the person in the past life. In other words, she was trying to lead me to the death of John the Beloved. And she didn't realize to John at that time, nothing was more important than Jeshua. So she says, how would you feel about seeing his death? And meanwhile, what she's not knowing is in my regression, I'm watching him walk away. And I said, I couldn't imagine it. And she says, would you like to try? I said, oh, okay. You hear me very trepidatiously say, oh, yeah, oh, okay. And she leads me there. And the next thing I know, I'm standing there looking up at him on the cross, and I start screaming and wailing. And she took a few moments using hypnosis to pull my emotions out of me, to get me to a higher space, and where I could be an observer more so than in the middle of the emotions of it. And I'm sitting there experiencing this, and she says, so what is the purpose of that life? And once again, I thought she meant the life of Jeshua, right? I said, he came here and recognized his own divinity. He's just like us, basically. He's just showing an example of our highest potential. And he understood that we are all pure love at the core, and it's these things of divinity that hold us back. It's actually so simple that we have a hard time understanding it, because we create our experience all the time, and it's so simple we just have a hard time getting it. And we just kept going through this process of asking questions back and forth, and it was life-changing for me. It was absolutely life-changing for me. I came out of there, and I took a long time to just literally sit with it. And once again, just like before, I pushed everybody away, and I I was like, this is crazy. This is insane. Meanwhile, under regression, I could smell the air. I could feel the wind. I mean, I was having the full sensory awareness of that, and that man standing in front of me, showing me what my potential was. And it by running away, what eventually happened was I was sitting there and I was trying to avoid the whole topic with everybody. And a buddy of mine comes over and he gives me a book. I was really into reading about Edgar Cayce at the time. He gives me a book, Edgar Cayce on the Millennium by Jess Stern. And I pick it up and I'm like, oh, this will be a fun read, see what he had to say about the future, whatever. And I start diving into it. I get to page 36 and it says, John the Beloved will again be named John.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, crap. Right? So then I just couldn't deny it. But then I had to add to this before I'd let you get to your question. I know I'm talking a lot, but what happened, there's a certain percentage of people who get regressed who have spontaneous regressions thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of the people who got their spontaneous regressions thereafter. So every so often I'll have a full snap into that experience. And it's usually when somebody will ask me a question or say something, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And sometimes it'll just snap me into that experience. And so I've been having these spontaneous regressions back to that life and experiencing Jeshua and his family. And so it's been a really interesting journey. And this has been going on since 1999.
And then I know you get this question often, but what did Jesus look like?
And it's actually, if you go on my YouTube channel, I have a video called The Most Controversial Video. He was a very, very dark-skinned man. He had dark, curly locks, but they were sun-bleached and had a reddish tint to it. His eyes were a blue in color, but not like the real pale blue. It was like almost a darker blue. And I was like, how could that be? Because you'd always expect me brown from that part of the world.
Right.
And I was talking to a guy who worked at the Smithsonian in D.C., and I was standing there looking at the Neanderthals, and Neanderthals had this reddish tint to their hair. And I was like, that's really strange. I said, what do you think? Do you think that Jesus might have had that? Because I was thinking, this was the experience I just had. And he goes, yeah. He says he probably had hair similar to that, and he probably had blue eyes too, because they had blue eyes at that time period. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really strange. He was dark skinned, blue eyed, and if you on that video I mentioned, the most controversial video, I have an actual painting of him, and what I painted myself from memory. And it's funny because as we're talking, I keep looking to my side over here. The painting of him is right over there hanging on an easel. Yeah, he kind of stares at me the whole time I do this.
What are some misconceptions people have about Jesus?
Well, he was married. He definitely was married. He was married to Mary Magdalene, or Mariam de Magdala, and he called her Ishti, which was a nickname that basically it means wife, but he called her Ishti, and they had this fun, lively relationship. He was hysterically funny. He was constantly, making you laugh.
Because that was gonna be my next question. I wanted to know if Jesus ever told any jokes. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny. People have asked. That's a question I get a lot.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I get that a lot. He was very funny all the time, but they didn't tell classic jokes like we do now. So right. He was very circumstantial, and he used comedy in ways to catch you off guard. Like he'd get you laughing, and then he'd drop a truth in behind it, because you'd be open and laughing. You weren't in your fear at that moment. So he would kind of like get you laughing and then drop in the truth. He also used it in times of torment. Years later, somebody asked me that exact question, and I had one of my spontaneous regressions, and it's a moment that actually is it's powerful for me, because John was the only one of the 12 who actually saw the crucifixion. The rest of them were all in hiding. And John was there because Jeshua had basically given him a charge of taking care of his wife and his mother. And that's why in the Bible it even says, mother, there's your son, son, there's your mother. John was in charge, basically there to take care of the Marys. And my memory of this that came up was interesting. When they nailed him to the cross, which was not as tall topped as most crosses you see, but it was very short. It was just enough to give a joint to hold it from shifting. But the cross was laid down, and they laid him on top of it. They nailed his feet at the ankles into the sides of the cross, and then they nailed into here, not here. And they got him nailed, and then they pushed the cross up, and the hillside was it was like standing on a giant stone slab, and they had chipped these holes into the slab because they were reusing crosses. They would just basically stand across up, and it would drop down into those holes. So they nailed him on it, laying down, and they pushed it up. And when they pushed it up, it drops into that hole. And when it drops into that hole, you imagine the agony that you would feel with your ankles nailed and your wrists nailed, and suddenly you have this big jerking motion of all the weight of your body being forced down on it like that. And he hit, and he looked at me square in the eyes, and he did this face that was like, well, that hurt. Right? It was like in that moment where he should have totally been in his own agony, his own, he had the complete right to be very self-centered in that moment. And he looked at me and made me have a lighter moment about it. And that was huge for me, because it was like, even in those traumatic moments, he was still keeping that sense of humor and using it to make others feel better.
Wow. I love that. That's such a beautiful, well, it's very dark, but also very beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, it's pretty dark.
Yeah, very dark. But what was the process of healing like for Jesus? Or did you ever experience him healing?
I did, and it's really interesting. There's a famous story in the Bible of a town called Beth Shean, and the story in the Bible talks about how they would avoid Beth Shean because no healings could happen there. And I remember we would go to Beth Shean, and Jeshua would sit out by the wadi, the dry riverbed, on the outskirts of town, and James and John would go into town and say to people, Jeshua's out by the wash. If you want a healing, come to him. And they had to have the faith to walk to him, right? So Jeshua understood that his job was to as far as healing was concerned, was to be the conduit of pure love. But no healing was going to happen without the belief of the person being healed. And so he would create these moments to make them have a faith. Like they'd have to walk out of Beth Shean to him as a leap of faith. There's the story of putting mud on the blind man's eyes. Well, the reason that was because the blind man needed something to put faith in. And by giving the gesture of the mud, it gave him something to put faith in. When in the Bible it says, it is your faith that heals you. Where modern religion gets lost is they get into the space of thinking the word faith means faith in Jesus, faith in Jeshua. And it doesn't mean that. It just means belief. You have to have complete belief, faith that it's happening. And Jeshua knew that if he came in pure essence of love, that he could wipe out all ailment. Now, he also believed that all ailment was rooted in some fear. And he believed that no fear could exist in perfect love, which is a line from the book of John. So by coming there and radiating that pure love, he was basically creating the intention and the pool for them to drink of, but they had to be active in the drinking thereof, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Have you ever read the book A Course in Miracles?
I have read pieces and parts of it. I haven't never.
A lot of that's very familiar. I just started reading it yesterday, and it says a lot of similar things. So
and she says that Jeshua channeled that to her.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I think that channeling is a fascinating thing, because when you look at what this history of channeling, the word channeling comes from sailing. It means you have a body of water over here and a body of water over here, and there's a strip of land, and there's this waterway that goes between these two bodies of water. And when you look at it from on a psychic level or a channeling level in that direction, you have this the super consciousness or the God consciousness, and you have the physical world consciousness, and you have this channel in between. And so channeling is bringing down information, healing, all the psychic or healing, all that work is all some form of channeling. And so when he would say that pure essence of love and healing, what he was doing was basically bringing that channel down and then getting them to channel to it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we're always like we all channel to some degree. Like
I
inspiration is a form of
I
channeling. People get songs and ideas all the time. A lot of that's coming from our higher self, or
I completely agree. And the one thing that I think most people miss is that you're already creating your experience.
right.
I have the issue that I find that most people have is that they don't have belief in themselves to know that they're divine. And I'm going to tell you my weird channeling experience, because I used to do a lot of private sessions with people and help people come to their faith and their healings. And I've witnessed amazing healings. Um, but at one point, this lady really needed to have uh, an angelic thing happen during her session, and all I was there was literally sitting there, opening up to source and letting whatever came through, however it should come through. And I started having this experience where I started channeling, but it was like channeling an entity or whatever. And it was something I've never done in my life. And what happened was when it first came through, it had an accent, it had all this stuff. And I was like, that's the strangest thing I've ever experienced. And I immediately got some friends together. I said, let's see what this is and what can happen from this. And we started having biweekly meetings and just letting it happen. About the third month in, this entity, he called himself Gabriel, which was later on discovered was the ancient pronunciation of Gabriel. And about third month in, I was always referred to in third person. So Gabriel would refer to John, right? And about third month in, he started saying John I, John I. And one of the ladies at the session said, why are you saying John I? And it was explained that I was not comfortable with my own worthiness to bring something through myself and be a creator myself. And because I was not comfortable, I needed some entity to put outside of myself. Just like the healing, when they put the mud on the eyes, the entity was the mud for me. And what was happening was, as I was feeling more comfortable with the process of bringing information through, I was not needing the entity as much. And within another month after that, I never used the accent again, and it was always my own voice. So it was like the entity kind of faded back into the oneness of God, and I was just directly channeling. And to me, that was huge, because when I look at the people who are out there channeling, for instance, Abraham Hicks, who I think is amazing, right? You look at her earliest recordings, she has an accent, she speaking in a different voice and tonality, and now she speaks like Esther Hicks, right?
Right.
So she's becoming more and more comfortable, and the personality is leaving. So it kind of, to me, matched that same experience. But I think that we're all part of oneness. And in Hinduism, they talk about the Sit being the universal consciousness of God. And we're the Sit Sat Ki, we're the individual sparks within that consciousness. And I think that everyone that you're experiencing, everything you're experiencing is one with God. And so tapping into Jeshua for a channeling is absolutely possible, because he is also one with God, as is Gabriel or whoever else is there, and you and me. And when I do my private readings for people, I sit down an hour before I do the reading and I do an automatic writing. And I just open up, and whatever comes through, and then it becomes part of the reading to them. And what I find really fascinating is I'll get some of the weirdest information that I'm like, if I was to judge this in any way, shape, or form, it wouldn't be clear. And because I don't judge it, I end up saying things that really only fit for the person across from me. To give you just an example of that, I did a session not too long ago where in the middle of the session, I said, I'm supposed to say that you're truly scrumptious. And she started giggling. I said, and I'm supposed to call you Choochie Face. And she says, "Oh my God!" I go, "What?" Now I knew where it came from. It comes from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the movie. But when I heard it, I knew I was supposed to say it, and so I said it. She says, "My husband used to sing those two songs to me before he died. You're truly scrumptious, and you're my little Choochie Face." And she says it was one of our favorite movies. And so it comes down to it's just a matter of setting yourself aside, but realizing that you are as divine as everybody else. Jeshua said, "Greater works than I have done, you will do." Ye are gods. Each one of us is creating our experience. That's why negative people see a negative world, because they're creating a negative world around themselves. Positive people see a positive world for the same reason. And the key really is that you've got to come to the present moment, because the past is just a collection of present moment memories, and the future is just a place where we set goals for our next present moment. But this present moment is the only moment that you can create and have thought, word, and deed. So whatever you're putting after I am, you're creating if you believe it. So if you believe the world sucks, you're going to say, I'm living a sucky life. And God's name, according to Moses, was I am. And in the Bible, it says, whatever you ask in God's name is granted. So I am having a sucky life is creating that experience. And it really comes down to getting very, very present. And Joshua himself, in the Bible, there's references to him to saying, don't think about tomorrow, be here today. So it really comes down to that moment.
Yeah. What do you think the point of Jesus's life was?
Well, it's a great question, because Joshua's point really was let me reframe it a little bit. Joshua was a man, and most people forget he's a man. They tend to think of him walking in the room and hearing choirs sing. And right. He was a man, but he was a man who came at a very young age to understand his oneness with God. The Father and I are one. And his simple message is this: you're the same. He never referred to himself as the Son of God. He referred to himself as the Son of Man. But he said, you are the children of God, right? He was saying, look, you're saying I'm the Son of God. If that's true, then you're the children of God, because it's all the same. We're all in equal standing. We're all one with God, and God is everything. Mm-hmm. Now, here's where science and spirituality come together. If he's correct, his message of our own personal power and divinity is within us, then science can prove it pretty quickly, because you look across the room and you see the wall over there, and it's pure energy, according to Einstein. Nothing there but an energy event. And then you look at the right in between your eyes and that wall is the air, and the air is made of the same exact stuff, atoms, right? But it gets really weird when you start to realize that your eyes are also made of that same stuff too. And then the line, we are created in God's image, comes to life, because you realize that the entire experience that you have is the oneness of God. And all you really are is the consciousness within that oneness of God. And you are the Sit Sat Ki, as the Hindus would say. But when you come to the realization that your thoughts are creative, then you come to the space of how can I create and what can I do? And that is one of the key universal truths that he used to teach, but you can find it everywhere. Buddha said, what you think you become, you create your world. Krishna said, you are the culmination of your thought. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. Shakespeare said, there's nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. And the philosopher Descartes, I think, therefore I am, right? It's a universal truth that our thoughts are creative. And what he was showing us was, it was our thoughts, not thoughts about him.
Right.
He was showing us our personal power, our personal divinity.
Yeah. In the book, A Course in Miracles, he says, "Don't think of me as a god. Think of me as your older brother that's just trying to help you trying to help you get to my level." And I was like, that
Ex-
makes a lot of sense.
That's exactly what he taught. That's exactly what he taught. And when you dive into the Quran and you start looking at him in the Quran, he's known as Isa in the Quran, which is fascinating because that's what they call him in India too. And the prophet Isa in India, they say is Jeshua before he came back to Israel. Um, but when you look at him in there, one of the rules of Islam is that you will not deify Muhammad as the Christians have deified Jesus, the son of Mary, is what it says. Um, because it's not about deification; it's about understanding who we truly are, and he was just showing us who we truly are.
I think it's also beautiful because I grew up going to church in a very religious household, and it was all fear based mostly. And I did the same thing where I kind of fell off and became an atheist for a bit, then agnostic, and then I did past life regressions and
Mm.
get into psychedelics. And I was like, okay, I know there's something, but I don't know what that something is. And then
Yeah.
I've slowly made my way back to uh, basically where you are, or where I'm making these videos, where I'm trying to encourage people to just open their minds to uh, the love side of it. There shouldn't be fear. And I like how you even said it's like it's not um, you shouldn't even be fearful of God. Like
No.
God is love. God is not about fear, right?
Yeah, absolutely. God is love, and if it, in fact, if it's not loving, it's not of God,
Exactly.
right?
That's not love. Yeah.
And right, and if you think about this, Buddha said the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. And but if you think about what fear is an emotional reaction to a future event that may or may not happen with you focused on a negative outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you were focused on a positive outcome, you wouldn't be afraid. It wouldn't be right. You if you were focused on a positive outcome, you wouldn't be afraid. So fear is literally just negatively focused on certainty. The other thing about the fear that you have to realize is that fear is rooted in an uncertain future moment. It's not rooted where you are because the event that you're fearing is ahead of you. But it's the I am moment that you live. It's the I am moment that you're experiencing. So if you're focused on something that may or may not happen in the future and you're putting all your focus there, you're not living in the present. And what he taught was getting very present. It's funny when I use my own personal prayer formula, not telling anybody to do anything I'm saying. Find your own path. It's there are many ways to the source as long as they all go to loving at some point. But for me, I use this because mom was Catholic, and I have a prayer formula that I use. I say, "Thank you, God." You can say consciousness, yada yada, whatever you want to call it. Thank you, God, for the blank. And I usually like to add a positive or an extra statement there. It's like joyful amount of abundance I am receiving. Thank you, God, for the whatever, joyful amount of, or, happy experience that I'm having. Right. And then I say, I am receiving God's name, receiving. And I don't believe in affirmations. I believe in declarations. And
Mm.
the reason I say that is because the word affirmation itself simply means I'm shoring something up I have no confidence in. Because if you had confidence in it, you wouldn't need to affirm it.
Right.
Right. So I just declare, I just believe, and I am receiving, and then I say the word amen. Now, most people in the world do not know what the word amen means. It just means so be it. It means right here, right now, done. It's a completely present moment statement. And so it's a matter of drawing time close. Draw your time close. Get out of your past and all the victim things that happened back there. That future that you're trying to create for yourself, stop trying to get to it because you never get to it in the future. It comes to you depending on by what you're doing in the present moment. And so start doing things in alignment with the outcome you want, and it'll surround your present moment experience. But stay very present and be in this moment and love one another, because a lot of people who are into the metaphysics are very much trying to save the world,
Right.
and they can't save the world. But what they can do is make their part of the world so bright that the world saves itself, because they'll shine so bright that somebody next to them will say, hey, I want what they have. And they'll start creating a brighter world, and the world will collectively save itself. But that one person going out there and trying to save it is going to struggle because everybody's consciousness has to be involved in changing the world, right? Because you're talking about the entire experience, right?
Yeah.
So it really comes down to each one of us stepping into our power, stepping into our brightness, and simply loving one another. Um, for years, I tried all different forms of meditation. And after many years of trying all the different techniques, mantras and breathing meditations and fire candle meditations and walking meditations, I realized they all brought me to one spot. It was the spot where I simply let go, just exhaled and felt that feeling. And when that feeling hit is when I would drop into deep meditation. And I no longer call it meditation. I just call it sitting in love. So now when I go to the grocery store, I walk in love. I get to the grocery store, and before I go in, I go, and I just let go, and the goosebumps rise on my arm, right? And I get a smile on my face, and I walk into the grocery store. What happens is I walk through the grocery store, people do a double take and smile back at me. And then people start talking to me, and I laugh and I joke with everybody around me as I walk through the store. And I've been in the store with people who are not that way, and people avoid them and are just mean or nasty or whatever. But when you walk in that light, when you walk in that joy and that loving essence, it comes right back to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I always remind people too, if they're too negative or they start thinking in the anxiety or the fear side, or in terms of, especially if they're religious, or they start getting hung up on certain rules or laws that they think they have to follow, I always go back to Jesus said, if you don't have love, you don't have anything. So if you
That's
don't
right.
have love in your heart, then you're missing the whole point. So it doesn't matter what you're doing if it doesn't come back to love. And so I think that solves all things. And yeah, if you're living in love, constantly trying to give love out to others, it's only gonna come back because you're being God in that moment, because that's what
Right.
God is. God is love.
God is like you say it exactly like I say it. I said, if you're doing something, and it goes down to the simplest of moments. I was driving down the road with somebody one day, and she said to me, "How come cars merge easily with you on the highway?"
Mhm.
I said, "Because I love driving. I love driving, so driving gives me loving things." You know, there's a Hindu Swami Narayan. He reached enlightenment at age 13, and there's one of the stories they have of him was that he wandered into a village that at nighttime was having a problem with an Asiatic lion who was attacking people, a man-eater. And he arrived at the village at dusk, and they said, young boy, come into our house. And he said, no, I'm fine. And they all closed into their houses for the night, and they came out in the morning, and he was sitting by a tree, and the lion was asleep about 6 feet away. And they asked him, how come the lion didn't eat you? He says, because I'm without fear, he gave me nothing to be fearful for.
Wow.
And that experience to me is huge. We carry our fears in and around us, but it's going to resonate out into the experience and become part of the solution around us of a negative or fear-based things. I know people who can walk up to any dog and the dog will lick them and love them like crazy, and somebody else can walk up and that dog will snap at them. Well, the one person walking up they snapped at was afraid of them, so they gave him something to be fearful for. So to me, it really is about coming down to just being loving in the present moment. And love is everything. You're absolutely right when you said that, Alan. It's like you can love every experience of your life. And when you're loving it, you're being God.
Yeah. And that's the only choice that you have to make in life is you
Yeah.
can choose love or you choose fear. There's a really good story I just read in a book yesterday about this guy. He woke up in the middle of the night and someone had broken into his house and was stealing stuff. And when he saw that guy saw him, the burglar was trying to make it out the window. And the guy, instead of freaking out, pulling a gun or calling the cops, he said, hey, hold on, come back inside. Like, you're okay. Like, why are you doing this? And he like sat him down and was like, he's like, I'm not going to do anything to you, whatever. And he asked the burglar, like, why are you doing this? And the burglar was like, I was having a hard time. Like, I got laid off. I needed money and I don't know what I'm going to do right now. So I just have a lot of anxiety and fear. And so the guy was just like, well, I can give you money. And, he gave them money, talked with him, I think invited him back like the next day. And it was just like such a beautiful story of even what Jesus says. Like if someone asks for your cloak or tries to get your cloak, give them your shoes as well. Like it's all about choose love. But we hear those stories, we repeat them all the time in like churches, but it's so rare that you hear someone that lived it, you know?
Yeah, and that really is the key. You have to live it, because you know we're having an experience here, and what we do with that experience is the important part of the whole thing. Is if we can live a loving life and we can express love to someone else, we can change the world. We can bring heaven to earth, right? Mm-hmm. Heaven meaning that loving essence can come in. And I personally, to give people some hope, I spoke 20 years ago, and there was a book written about me called John of Old, John of New, and I was speaking at the Edgar Cayce Foundations, and I spoke in Unity churches, and everyone was so trapped into who I was, which I'd love to tell you about reincarnation in a second, what I believe about it. Mm-hmm. They were so trapped into who I was that they weren't hearing the teaching, what I was saying, and I started to feel like I was being a detriment. My story was a detriment to what I was there to share. And so I left the work, and I went off and I went into corporate speaking, because what I was doing was, in the corporate world, I was sneaking the messages in, but using their vocabulary. And I never felt really authentic doing that. I really felt like I needed to be me again. And when I came back to the work a year ago, and it literally just a year ago, and you said earlier, I have over 600 videos on my channel right now, and that's all within a year. I just pump them out, right? Because I feel like I want to share so much. When I came back to the work and I started doing my private readings with people, I was so overjoyed with the experience I had, because it no longer was about that past life experience. It was now really about, how can I go to the next level? How can I step into my own divinity? How can I become empowered? And my whole YouTube channel is exactly about that. It's about you stepping into your power. That's why if you ever go to my YouTube channel, 90% of the videos there are answering people's questions rather than me talking about my past life experience, because it literally is, they ask a question and I come back with how I understand it from my teaching. I don't expect anyone to believe anything I say. I truly believe what my mother said all those years ago, that spirituality is a personal journey. We each must find our own way. And so I know people who are really into the law of one material. And mm-hmm. I've met one person who's into that, who is just a zealot and everything else is wrong. And I've met another one who is a totally loving individual. And I look at him and I say, yeah, he's found love in that paradigm. And so he's found God, right? It doesn't matter if he's Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, Wicca. If you found love, you found God. I think that once you drop into one set idea, you actually miss the enormity of God, because God's all of it. Right? Totally. Now, as far as reincarnation is concerned, I do want to talk about that, because I don't know what reincarnation is. I don't know whether I'm the only one with these memories, whether there's a million of us with memories, whether we all can access these memories. I just know that I have these memories, and I think it would be wrong of me not to share these memories. But I'm not vain enough to say I know what reincarnation is, and I'm definitely not vain enough to say that I was, John the Beloved. My channel is called John of New for a reason. It's not called John of Old, because I'm John Davis. I'm a guy who's had some experiences and I'm sharing them. But I do not expect anyone to believe or follow. I believe them to, it's for them to discern their own truth out of it and then get in the present moment and live it.
If people want to contact you, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you? Or do you want people to get in contact with you?
Oh, please. My goal is to get this information out as much. That's why I made 600 videos in a year. The best way to get a hold of me is at my website, johnofnew.com, all one word, JOHNOFNEW.com. And if you go to my YouTube channel, just search John of New on there. You'll find my channel there as well. I put up usually 1 or 2 videos a day. And it literally is, like I said, 90% answering questions. Those questions are usually given to me in comments below videos or emailed to me through my contact form on my website. I mentioned earlier that I do private readings. I'd like to offer your audience, if they're interested, go do your research on me first, right? but if you're interested, I would like to offer your audience of $50 off my readings, and I'll give a special link for you to put in the description. If you're interested in hearing my regression, I do sell the digital download of it on my website. You'll hear the moment of me screaming at the crucifix and the moaning when I went out of body in my regression. You'll hear all that firsthand. And that's how you get a hold of me and all that.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for taking the time and talk with me. It's very fascinating, and it's always just fun to talk about this sort of stuff. So thank you. I appreciate it.
I agree. Oh, thank you. And if you ever want to talk again, Aaron, I would totally be there. Cool. Totally be there.
All right. Well, sounds good. So what do you think? Did he know Jesus in a past life? Let me know in the comments, and if you like, you can subscribe by clicking on my face right there. I have a past life regression you can do, and I also have some other videos where I did a past life regression on myself that kind of got me started on this whole weird world. Hope to see you again sometime. Bye-bye.